The moment her spine hit the cold metal, something ancient and dormant stirred within her soul. Years of discipline, countless hours on training mats, the bruises and sweat of becoming someone who could never be broken again, all of it crystallized in that single instant. The laughter around her sounded distant, hollow, almost pitiful. They had no idea who they had just cornered. They thought they were pushing around another timid teacher who would crumble under their cruelty. But Rebecca Stone had stopped crumbling a long time ago. Rebecca had arrived at Riverside Academy with stars in her eyes and hope burning in her chest. Mathematics had always been her sanctuary, a place where chaos transformed into order, where every problem had a solution if you were patient enough to find it. Growing up without much, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, Rebecca learned early that the world wasn't fair. Her father had disappeared when she was barely old enough to remember his face, leaving behind only absence and the echo of broken promises. School had been her escape. While other children played, Rebecca found beauty in numbers, in the elegant dance of equations and the satisfying click when everything fell into place. She wasn't the popular girl. She wasn't invited to parties or whispered about in hallways. She was the quiet one, the one with second-hand clothes and homemade lunches, the easy target for kids who needed someone to feel superior to. The teasing had been relentless. Nerdy Rebecca, poor Rebecca, weird Rebecca. The names stung, but they also forged something unbreakable inside her. Her mother, exhausted but fiercely loving, had noticed the bruises, both visible and invisible. One evening, after finding Rebecca crying in her room, her mother had sat beside her on the bed, work-worn hands gentle on her daughter's shoulders. "Strength isn't about being the loudest or the meanest," she had said softly. "Real strength is knowing who you are and never letting anyone take that away from you." Those words had planted a seed. At 13, Rebecca walked into a martial arts studio downtown, using money saved from babysitting. The instructor, a quiet woman with scars on her knuckles and kindness in her eyes, had seen something in the shy girl with determined eyes. For years, Rebecca trained. Through high school, through college, through every challenge life threw at her. The dojo became her second home, falling, rising, learning to redirect force, to use an opponent's strength against them, to move with purpose and precision. By the time she earned her black belt, Rebecca wasn't the same frightened girl anymore, but she kept that part of herself private. It wasn't something she advertised. When she finally stood in front of her own classroom for the first time at Riverside Academy, she wanted to be known for her teaching, for her to make abstract concepts come alive, for the way she could help struggling students finally understand. She wore modest dresses, spoke gently, smiled warmly. She believed in the power of education, in the fundamental goodness that could be nurtured in young people if someone just cared enough to try. Riverside Academy was prestigious, at least on the surface. Nestled in an affluent neighborhood, it boasted state-of-the-art facilities, championship trophies lining glass cases, and parents who donated generously to keep their children's academic records looking pristine. But beneath the polished exterior, Rebecca quickly sensed something rotten. The social hierarchy was rigid and cruel. Athletic students, particularly the football team, operated like untouchable royalty. They walked the halls with an arrogance that went unchallenged. Their letter jackets worn like armor, their voices always the loudest. She noticed the other students immediately, the ones who made themselves small, who ate lunch in bathroom stalls, who flinched when the popular kids approached. She saw the way teachers looked the other way, how administrators smiled nervously when football players disrupted class, how complaints seemed to evaporate into nothing. The team brought glory, brought funding, brought prestige. Everything else, including basic decency, came second. Rebecca's first weeks were a study in contrasts. Some students genuinely engaged with her lessons. She brought mathematics to life through real-world applications, showing them how algebra predicted weather patterns, how geometry built skyscrapers, how statistics could reveal truth hidden in data. These students leaned forward in their seats, asked questions, stayed after class to discuss concepts. Their enthusiasm reminded her why she had chosen this path. But then there were the others. Derek, Brandon, and Kevin sat in the back row, a triumvirate of entitled cruelty. Derek was the ringleader, tall and muscular, with the easy confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. Brandon followed his lead with eager malice, while Kevin provided the muscle and the menacing glares. They whispered during lectures, threw paper wads when her back was turned, made crude jokes, just loud enough for the class to hear, but quiet enough to deny if confronted. Rebecca tried the gentle approach first. She pulled Derek aside after class, speaking respectfully about his potential, about how his disruptive behavior affected others. He had smirked, looked her up and down dismissively and said, "You're sweet, Miss Stone. But you don't get how things work here." The message was clear. She was nobody, and they were untouchable. She tried speaking to other teachers, seeking advice. Most offered sympathetic looks, but little help. "The football team is, well, they're difficult," one veteran teacher had said carefully. "Best to just get through the year." Another had been more direct. "Pick your battles. You can't win against them." But Rebecca wasn't interested in winning or losing. She just wanted to teach, to do her job, to help all her students, even the ones who didn't want help. She continued showing up every day with lesson plans and patience, hoping that consistency and genuine care would eventually break through. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Rebecca was leaving her classroom, arms full of papers to grade, her mind already planning the next day's lesson on quadratic equations. The hallway was crowded with students transitioning between classes, the noise level rising with teenage energy and social drama. She was focused on not dropping her materials when Derek's voice cut through the ambient noise. Well, if it isn't Miss Mathematics." Rebecca looked up to find the three of them blocking her path. Derek stood front and center, Brandon and Kevin flanking him like bodyguards. The crowd around them seemed to sense something brewing, students slowing their pace, conversations dropping to whispers. "Excuse me," Rebecca said evenly, attempting to step around them. Derek moved with her, staying in her way. "What's the rush? Don't you want to talk to your students?" His tone dripped with mockery. "You're always going on about how we should engage with the material. Well, here we are, engaged." Brandon snickered. "Yeah, we're super engaged, Miss Stone." Rebecca kept her expression neutral, her voice calm. "If you have questions about the homework, we can discuss it during office hours. Right now, I need to get to a meeting." She tried again to move past, but Derek's hand shot out, making contact with her shoulder. It was light, almost playful, but the intent was clear. A test, to see if she would react, if she would give them what they wanted: fear, anger, tears, anything they could use to humiliate her further. The hallway went quieter. Students stopped pretending not to watch. Rebecca paused, papers still clutched to her chest, and looked directly at Derek. "Please don't touch me." Her voice remained steady, professional, but inside, memories flickered like old film reels. She was 12 again, cornered by older students who thought her strangeness gave them permission to torment her. She was 16, pushed into lockers because she didn't fit their definition of acceptable. Every past humiliation, every time she had felt powerless, rose up like ghosts. But she wasn't 12 or 16 anymore. Derek laughed, encouraged by his friend's approval. "Or what? You gonna give me detention?" He stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. "You think you're gonna change anything here? You think you matter?" Before Rebecca could respond, Kevin kicked one of her books, sending it skidding across the floor. Papers scattered like autumn leaves. Students gasped, some moving back, others pulling out phones. "Oops," Kevin said, grinning. "Clumsy me." Rebecca took a slow breath. She could feel her heart rate elevating, but not from fear. It was the physiological response of someone preparing for action, of muscle memory awakening. She bent down to gather her materials, moving deliberately, giving them a chance to walk away, to stop, before things went further. But Derek apparently interpreted her composure as weakness. As she straightened up, he shoved her hard, both hands against her shoulders. The force sent her backward, her spine connecting with the lockers with a metallic clang that echoed down the entire hallway. Pain radiated through her back. Papers flew from her hands. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Every eye was on her. Every student was waiting to see if she would cry, if she would run to the principal's office, if she would prove to be just another adult who couldn't protect herself, let alone them. Rebecca felt something shift inside her, like tectonic plates realigning. Every hour she had spent training, every time she had been thrown and learned to fall correctly, every technique drilled into muscle memory until it became instinct. All of it crystallized into perfect clarity. She looked at Derek, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a threat, but as a boy who had never been told no, who had confused cruelty with strength, who thought power came from making others feel small. He was pathetic, really, and she was done being anyone's victim. Rebecca straightened slowly, methodically, like a spring coiling. Her voice when she spoke was utterly calm, almost gentle. "Are you finished?" Derek blinked, surprised. Then his face hardened with anger. "Oh, you think you're tough now?" He moved toward her again, hand raised for another shove. But this time, Rebecca was ready. His hand came forward, and her hand moved faster than his eyes could track. She grabbed his wrist with precision, her thumb finding the pressure point her instructor had shown her years ago. In the same fluid motion, she pivoted her hips, dropped her weight, and executed a textbook shoulder throw. Derek's feet left the ground, his body rotating through the air in an arc of shocked incomprehension before he landed hard on the linoleum floor. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. He lay there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. The hallway erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Phones rose higher, capturing every second. Brandon and Kevin stood frozen for a moment, their brains struggling to compute the impossible. Their invincible leader sprawled on the floor at the feet of the quiet math teacher. Then Brandon's face flushed with humiliation and rage. He charged forward, telegraphing his intention so obviously that Rebecca had plenty of time to adjust her stance. As he reached for her, she stepped to the side, grabbed his arm, used his own momentum against him, and executed a clean hip throw. Brandon joined Derek on the floor, groaning as the air left his lungs. Kevin, despite witnessing two flawless takedowns, apparently couldn't resist. Pride or stupidity drove him forward. Rebecca almost felt sorry for him as she redirected his clumsy lunge into a wrist lock that sent him tumbling over his own feet to land beside his friends. 3 boys on the floor, Rebecca standing above them, not even breathing hard, her hair slightly disheveled, her expression almost serene. She hadn't struck anyone, hadn't used excessive force, had simply refused to be a victim. The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the hallway filled with applause and cheers, not from cruelty, but from sheer amazement. The students who had been terrorized for years, who had watched teacher after teacher fail to stand up to the bullies, were witnessing something they had never thought possible. Rebecca looked down at the 3 boys. "When you're ready to treat people with respect, I'll be in my classroom. Until then, stay out of my way." She gathered her scattered papers calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and walked away through a hallway that parted before her like the Red Sea. By the next morning, the entire school knew. The story had spread through social media, text messages, whispered conversations in every corner of Riverside Academy. The math teacher who had taken down the football team's stars. Some versions were exaggerated, turning it into an action movie fight scene. But the core truth remained. Miss Stone had defended herself with skill and composure, and the bullies had learned they weren't invincible. Rebecca walked into her classroom that morning to find it transformed. The students who usually slouched arrived early and sat attentively. The ones who had always looked down, avoiding eye contact, met her gaze with something new in their eyes, not just respect, but hope. Derek, Brandon, and Kevin slunk into the back row, silent for once, their swagger replaced with something that looked almost like shame. She taught that day the same way she always had, with passion, clarity, and genuine care for her students' understanding. But the atmosphere had changed fundamentally. Questions came more freely. The quiet students participated. Even some of the popular crowd who had previously ignored her seemed to actually listen. But Rebecca knew that institutional power wouldn't shift as easily as hallway dynamics. Sure enough, before lunch, she received a summons to Principal Anderson's office. Principal Anderson was a man in his 50s, with thinning hair and the perpetually worried expression of someone managing competing interests. He gestured for Rebecca to sit across from his imposing desk, surrounded by photos of championship teams and donation plaques. "Miss Stone," he began, his tone carefully neutral, "I've received several reports about an incident yesterday. Reports that you physically engaged with students." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I defended myself from assault, Principal Anderson. 3 students physically attacked me in a crowded hallway. I used minimal necessary force to protect myself." The principal shifted uncomfortably. "I understand that you may have felt threatened, but you must understand my position. These students' families are significant contributors to our school. The football program brings in substantial funding. We need to handle this delicately." Rebecca felt a flash of anger, but kept her voice level. "With respect, sir, their financial contributions don't give them the right to assault teachers. I was attacked. I defended myself. If the school's policy is that I should have simply allowed myself to be hurt, I'd like to see that in writing." Principal Anderson's face reddened. "That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm simply saying we need to consider all angles. Perhaps if you had just walked away or called for help." A knock interrupted him. Both turned to see Emily, a slight girl from Rebecca's second-period class, standing in the doorway. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "Principal Anderson, I was there. I saw everything." Emily stepped inside without waiting for permission. Derek, Brandon, and Kevin surrounded Miss Stone. They wouldn't let her pass. Kevin kicked her books. Derek shoved her into the lockers. Hard. She didn't start anything. She just refused to be their victim. The principal opened his mouth, but Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "And I'm not the only one who saw it. There are dozens of witnesses, all of us who have been too scared to speak up before because we knew nothing would happen. But Miss Stone showed us that we don't have to accept being treated like that. So here we are." As if on cue, more students appeared in the doorway. One by one, they filed into the office, some with their phones out showing videos of the incident, others simply standing in solidarity. Students Rebecca had never even spoken to, students from other classes, students who were tired of living in fear. A girl with glasses spoke up. "They've been bullying people for years. We've reported it before, and nothing happened." A boy in a band shirt added, "My brother graduated 2 years ago. Same guys were doing the same things then. Everyone knows, and everyone looks the other way because they win football games." Principal Anderson looked genuinely shocked. In all his years as an administrator, he had never seen students organize like this, never seen them willing to speak truth to power. The comfortable status quo he had maintained through convenient blindness was crumbling before his eyes. Rebecca watched it all, moved beyond words. These students, many of whom she barely knew, were standing up not just for her, but for themselves, for every person who had ever been made to feel small and powerless. The principal cleared his throat. "I see. Well, I'll need to review all the evidence before making any decisions." Emily stepped forward, placing her phone on his desk with a video playing. "Here's the evidence, sir." Crystal clear. Derek attacked her. She defended herself. If you punish her for that, every student in this school will know exactly what Riverside Academy really values. And it won't be our safety. The implicit threat was clear, and it was brilliant. In an age of social media and instant communication, a scandal like punishing a teacher for defending herself while protecting student bullies would destroy the school's reputation far more effectively than any football loss. Principal Anderson looked at Rebecca, then at the assembled students, then down at his desk. After a long moment, he sighed. "Miss Stone, you're free to return to your classroom. I'll be speaking with Derek, Brandon, and Kevin about their behavior and their families." The students erupted in relieved smiles and quiet cheers. As they filed out, many paused to thank Rebecca, to tell her they had her back, to express gratitude for showing them that strength could look like something other than cruelty. Emily was the last to leave. She paused in the doorway and looked back at Rebecca. "Thank you, Miss Stone. Not just for yesterday, for everything you teach us, and I don't just mean math." Walking back through the hallways later that day, Rebecca experienced something surreal. The social landscape had fundamentally transformed. Students who had been invisible were walking taller. The bullies, not just the three she had confronted but their entire circle, moved with less swagger. Teachers who had witnessed the aftermath looked at her with a mixture of admiration and something like guilt. Guilt for not standing up themselves, for accepting the unacceptable for so long. In the following weeks, changes rippled through Riverside Academy. The principal, perhaps genuinely moved or perhaps simply pragmatic, instituted new anti-bullying policies with actual teeth. Derek, Brandon, and Kevin faced real consequences for the first time in their lives. Suspension, mandatory counseling, and removal from team leadership positions. Their parents, confronted with video evidence and the testimony of dozens of students, couldn't simply buy their sons out of trouble. But the most profound changes were subtler, harder to quantify. A culture of fear had been replaced, at least partially, by a culture of accountability. Students felt empowered to report harassment. Teachers felt supported in enforcing rules regardless of a student's status. The quiet revolution that had begun with one woman refusing to be victimized spread through the school like wildfire through dry grass. Rebecca continued teaching mathematics with the same passion and care she always had. But now, her classroom had become something more than just a place to learn algebra and geometry. It had become a symbol, a reminder that real strength wasn't about dominance or cruelty. It was about knowing who you are, standing firm in your values, and refusing to let anyone make you small. On her desk, students started leaving small notes. "Thank you for showing us we matter. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being strong in a way that doesn't hurt people." Rebecca kept every single one, storing them in a folder she looked at on difficult days. They reminded her why she had become a teacher in the first place. Not to fill young minds with formulas and theorems, though that was important, but to show them, through example, that they could overcome their circumstances, that they could be both gentle and strong, that kindness wasn't weakness, and that standing up for yourself didn't require you to tear others down. Her mother, when Rebecca called to tell her what had happened, had cried with pride. "You remembered," she said through her tears. "Real strength is knowing who you are. And honey, you've always known exactly who you are. Years of training, years of discipline, years of choosing to be better rather than bitter, all of it had prepared Rebecca for that single moment when she refused to be a victim. But the aftermath taught her something just as important. Courage was contagious. By standing up for herself, she had given permission to an entire school of students to stand up for themselves. Months later, Rebecca still taught at Riverside Academy. Derek eventually apologized, genuinely and without prompting, admitting that he had never considered how his actions affected others. Brandon transferred to another school. Kevin completed his counseling and became, surprisingly, one of the more respectful students in class. The school's culture hadn't transformed overnight into a utopia, but it had shifted enough that students no longer accepted cruelty as the price of attendance. And Rebecca Stone, the quiet math teacher with a black belt and a heart full of hope, continued showing up every day, teaching equations and life lessons in equal measure. Proof that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a single person refusing to be broken.